Welcome to Wines and Wonders with Kirsten Fox. True stories with a side of wine. Looking for inspiration for your life and your wine glass? This is your podcast. Here's Kirsten.
Hello and welcome back to Wines and Wonders. So excited to get started. I have a guest with me today, but before I introduce her, I want to talk to you just for a minute about what's been happening with me and why there's been this long break of no new podcasts. And I have to say that I just have gone into a reinvention of my entire life through this situation that we've been all faced with COVID. And it's an amazing opportunity. It's also been amazingly disturbing in ways. It's been a time for me that I just have felt that I don't have the bandwidth to offer anything to anyone else. So I really had to take a break from doing podcasts. And so in this case now, I'm really excited to be back. I feel like I've got more energy. I feel really excited about doing podcasts again and talking with you. And that is why there was this long span of nothing. So I am really excited to be back here and talking with you. And what we're going to do is I've got Danielle Bryan here in the studio, in quotes, with me. And we are going to work together for the next few months to put together a new season of Wines and Wonders that is going to be talking about the subject of time. And we're going to study all sorts of different types of time, our reactions to time, quotes about time, and these kinds of things that will allow you to gain some perspective on this insanely deep and yet somewhat elusive concept of time. So, Danielle, welcome back to the desk.
Thank you.
Yeah, so happy to have you. And Danielle is a shaman. She has a website, shamanictwist.com, and one of the things I love about Danielle is she brings real life to the shamanic world and allows for, she even uses the woo-woo. And she'll say things like, this isn't all woo-woo. And since I'm such a practical person and I've just stepped into this world of energy and higher selves and all this, because I was taught at a very young age that you needed to be practical and plan everything and never ever look at intuition or energy or all those things. So it's taking me a while, but Danielle walks a great line between both the shaman world, the energetic world, and the reality of the world that we live in, especially right now. So I will start with, I was just listening to Brene Brown. She has a podcast called Unlocking Us. And she had a quote, and she says it to herself if she gets worked up about things. She says it to herself, and I wrote it down because it really has some meaning for me, and that is, I'm here to get it right, not to be right. And I think so much of what I've been going through with this whole COVID thing and losing businesses and that kind of thing is, I felt like, what kind of idiot would I not have been to set up some kind of plan B for as we go into this whole thing, and how stupid of me to have put so many eggs in one business's basket or this, that, or the other thing. And it all related to me needing to be right instead of me being in the process of getting it right and allowing for wrong. Because if you don't have to be right, you can allow for wrong and learn. And so,
or maybe it doesn't have to be wrong, Kirsten. Maybe it gets to be divine orchestration. Maybe it gets to be not about right and wrong, being right, not being right, but that place of recognizing that in all the divine timing of things, that it's your life experience. And there is something to be learned, and it doesn't have to be about you being right. You can get it right by surrendering into recognizing that the events that are taking place are all part of your personal experience. How you come to it really shapes the effect it has on you. which loops right into all of this talk about time.
Wow, I didn't know I was creating a segue. So, can we, just before we get into this subject, we're talking today, but I'll let you guys know, we're going to be focusing today on how emotions, our emotional feelings, affect our perception of time.
Mm-hmm.
But can I just ask a little more about this? So when I said it's okay to be wrong,
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, if I'm going through and I'm having a bad experience, I don't have to look at it as right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I can just approach it as a learning experience and not label it.
Right. Not label it. Because once we label it, we get caught in that dualistic perspective, right or wrong. Now we can switch it up and say, I don't have to be right, but is the implication that then you're wrong? Or if I didn't get it right, did I get it wrong? And what if we start to look at it as, I don't have to be right, but I can get it right? Is that the quote? Tell me the quote again.
The quote is, I'm here to get it right, not be right.
Okay, so to get it right can be all kinds of things. But I would begin to look at it from my perspective and say, I'm not here to be right. It's about getting it right. And within that, I don't want to get caught in a perspective of, while I'm getting it right, maybe I'm getting it wrong. Because that starts to put us into that right-wrong thinking. And from my perspective, in what I do for the last 20 years and looking at life from different levels of engagement and different perspectives, I would say, from a shamanic point of view, that you're never actually getting it wrong. It's all part of the divine orchestration of how things are unfolding, and anything can change. That means that if you're not in alignment with how it's going, which we could paraphrase by, this isn't working, it's wrong, then we can shift it. We can come into a different alignment. We can say, oh, wait, no, need to tweak it a little bit. Not quite like this, a little bit like this. But to not look at it as that was wrong or not right.
In the wrong, it's implying that there's a right destination or a right choice. And by me labeling something as wrong, it's not crediting that moment when the wrong was, or the not right was happening. And so the not right is just information to tweak.
Yeah.
Instead of viewing the not right as wrong.
Right. Because we're all conditioned. We've all been raised in right or wrong.
Yeah.
We're conditioned that way. And wrong will actually produce a response emotionally, physiologically. We go into this place, we slip into this place of the very quiet, silent, underlying voice that begins to say, what's wrong with you? You didn't do it right. You must not be fill in the blank, smart enough, equipped enough, rich enough, good looking enough, fit enough. I don't know, whatever you want to add into the blank line, right? But wrong implies lack, really. And for me personally, as I have been on this path and studying it very personally, the shamanic path for me is a first and foremost very personal practice and spiritual practice. From there, I've integrated it into my life to the point where it is also my professional practice, and it's what I do in the world. But first and foremost, it's a practice that I walk and work with, and I use this lens to look at my own life. And I've created enough space in my life where I've stopped looking at things as right or wrong, because wrong implies that there's something missing in my life. There's some kind of lack. There's some kind of not enoughness of something. And rather, I've come to look at my life's journey from the perspective of, if it doesn't feel in alignment, if I'm going to call something wrong, what that really is saying is, I'm not in alignment with this. There's another way I can come to this where I can create more alignment. Another way to say that is perhaps where I can create more harmony, where I can create more spaciousness, where I can create more grace in my life, where I can create more of a feeling of, yeah, this feels good. This is the right track. And again, here's the word right. But what we're really implying is that we are connected and we're in alignment. And so I love how you said just a few minutes ago, it's information. If we're to categorize something as, this is the wrong way to do it, maybe we start to look at it as, oh, there's information that I'm not in full alignment with how this is going, so I can tweak it. And we're not caught in wrong. It's not about your fault because you're not enough of something, therefore it's wrong. Rather, it's information to shift and tweak what we're doing so we can come into greater alignment.
I love the difference that it sounds like to me, the difference in how I feel about the phrase not right versus wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're saying, the physiological difference of how I feel of hearing not right. Because not right just does imply a tweaking.
Yeah.
It implies I'm not quite there yet, but you're on your way. It's got this whole forward energy where wrong is like bam.
Yeah, it's like a stop, right?
Yes,
brick wall.
Right. Like how could you have gotten yourself here?
Right.
Instead of just not right. Well, thank you, Brene, for kicking us off here today. I didn't realize it was going to be so. But again, Brene's quote was, I'm here to get it right, not be right. And so anyway, that's what we've been talking about. So now we're going to move into a discussion about time. We're going to have about 6 or so, unless we decide we're going to go further, 6 or so episodes in this season about time. And we're starting today with kind of parsing out how our emotions affect our perception of time. And one of I looked into some of the history of the study of our emotions on the subject of time. And it's basically, I'm sure you've all gone through this where you're in the middle of a car accident and something and you feel like suddenly everything is going in slow motion. And so there's that kind of experience. Or you look at your kids and you go, I swear just yesterday you were 5 and how did you get to 15? And so there's this alternate time depending on what you're feeling, or maybe you're out in the woods and you're enjoying a long walk and it feels like you were gone for a week when you're cooking something you don't want to cook and you're thinking, my gosh, is this ever going to be done? Like yesterday I cooked something that was like, are you kidding me? The artichokes basically never. I was trying the pressure cooker for the first time with artichokes and it was like, nope, not yet. Nope, not yet. Nope, not. I'm like, oh my gosh. So anyway, and so we're going to talk a little bit today. I'm going to start with some of the scientific studies with Danielle weighing in on some of this as we are getting going here. So basically, the study of our emotions on time, not quotes about time, not people who've talked about time, but really the study of our emotions on time has been going on for about 150 years as far as my research led me down this path. And they basically started researching in the early 1800s how human perception changes with your emotions. And they thought back then, their best theory was that we had some kind of a biological stopwatch in our brain, and it would slow or accelerate in line with what was getting our attention, or whether we were highly aroused or whether we were relaxed, or those kinds of things. They thought this biological stopwatch was constantly running in our brain. But more recently, the researchers have been looking at they were looking like for what brain areas were involved in internal timekeeping. And the way they were able to do this is with the use of MRI, the MRI machine. And they basically figured out that it's not just one part of our brain that is involved in time perception. It's more a whole area, a neural, like in our brain, all sorts of neural areas will light up as we are trying to perceive time or talk about time. So, anything to say about that before I go on to some of these studies? I just, I want to make sure that I don't just keep, going on with
What regions of the brain does it say?
It just says a large network of neural areas. I'm sure we could get into what regions, but I don't have that in the information here. Maybe that'll be podcast number 2.
Right.
On time.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay.
Well, depending on what region of the brain we're operating from, we do have different responses. So there's the reptilian brain, the limbic brain, there's the neocortex or the prefrontal cortex of the brain, and they all fire in different ways that create different thinking, different reasoning, and they have different functions over our body. So it's curious.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Of course. If you're in fear, your limbic system is going to be just all about it, right? Cool. Okay. So as we go through this, pop in because I don't have the areas of the brain going in my research here. So basically, there was a guy, and please excuse me, Mr. or Dr. Csikszentmihalyi, with they're like C's and Z's all throughout this name. Mihaly, we'll call him Mihaly because that's his first name. And he was at Claremont University, and he identified how, I'm going to start with the good stuff, the enjoyable experiences can affect our perception of our focus on time. He actually is the one that coined the phrase flow. So I think most of us have heard of the word flow in regards to, especially I've heard it in regards to athletics, where someone in a basketball game will get into the flow and just has a game of their lives. It's just ridiculous. And what he describes as flow is the experience of being so happily immersed in an activity, be it athletics, work, or a creative project, that all distractions are shut out and you lose track of time. And all of us have been there at some point.
Right. Or you're in complete presence. All your life force energy, all your circuits of life force energy are pulled out of the past and they're pulled out of the future, and they land right in this one moment that we're having. And so parts of ourselves are not anchored or hooked into the past or anchored or hooked into the future, because that's where we spend most of our orienting principle, is the past or the future. Which is why so many different spiritual traditions really talk about coming to the present moment. And in the present moment, it is timeless. And all our circuits of energy are right here, right now. And that's when we're in that place of flow, where it seems like anything and everything is possible. We can accomplish and do anything because we're completely aligned. And all of our resources, if you will, for creating something are all hands on deck in this moment to simply be in the flow of what's happening in that moment. That we're not fractured, if you will, or split between, I'm here, but I'm also thinking about what happened yesterday, and I'm also thinking about what do I need to do this afternoon. Most of us operate from that perspective.
Yes.
So all our circuits of energy are not wholly present for this moment right here, right now.
And there's more research on this staying in the moment later that I want to talk about. That brought up a quote that I found, and I'm sure you guys have heard this, but it deserves coming up right now. Yesterday's the past, tomorrow's the future, but today is a gift. That's why it's called the present. And that's Bill Keane said that. So in one of the experiments that this guy did, the researchers that were there with him trained the participants to tell the difference between a short photo exposure or a long photo, 400 milliseconds versus 1600 milliseconds. And then they showed pictures to the participants that were either neutral, and we're talking about like geometric shapes, completely neutral. And they had, the next series was a positive but low in motivation, right? Flowers. Then they did one that was positive but high in motivation, delicious desserts. Okay, right? We had a stake in it, right? And then they asked the person participating how long they saw each of these pictures,
Mm.
each of these three types of
Mhm.
pictures. We have the neutral, we have the positive and low in motivation, or we have the positive and high in motivation,
Mhm.
right? They showed that the people thought that the desserts were on a shorter time than they actually were.
Mhm.
So they were highly motivated and they loved seeing it and they felt like the time shortened up.
Right.
Where the geometric shapes or the pictures of the flowers, they had a pretty good idea that, oh, that was a short slide you showed me or that was a long slide.
Mhm.
They were completely off and they shortened the amount of time they thought they were seeing the desserts. Then another thing that came up, in 2012, behavioral science researchers from Stanford and the University of Minnesota, they had a trio of experiments and they were studying awe-filled experiences and your perception of time.
Mm.
Awe-filled experiences, right? So they had people watching videos of everyday people, but then they were interacting with, say, huge animals, or they were watching waterfalls, or it was like this awe-inspiring
Mhm.
photography and videography. And in the awe conditions, they reported feeling time passing more slowly.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have the one guy on one hand who's found that pictures of desserts cause us to think we're seeing them for a shorter time.
Right.
Then we've got these guys with awe, and basically they see it as passing more slowly. The scientists suggest that the awe caused people to feel more in the moment
Mm.
and led them to see time as more abundant.
Mhm.
So they did a variable as well. The first guy we talked about, Mihaly, with the people who were seeing the geometric shapes, the flowers, or the desserts. And he said that the people who were the most hungry saw the shortest time of the desserts
Right.
because they really wanted them and they were like super enticed by them versus the people who maybe were full and they were like looking at a picture of a dessert. So how can we set these two studies in perspective? Can we talk about that? Because if you talk about flow, I think flow applies to more awe.
Mhm.
But the fact that when you see something good, you would think that would be in the flow, like a picture of a dessert. Why does that shorten?
It's interesting because your point, and I was thinking this as you were starting to ask the question of why do the people who are in an awe-inspiring perspective feeling like time is more abundant versus, the people who want the desserts think that it's only being shown for half the amount of time as some random geometric shape, right? Now, what's really interesting is it comes back to the individual for the first study, for the geometric shapes, the dessert, and the positive low motivation slides, right? Because food actually triggers a region of the brain in a different way than looking at waterfall does.
Okay.
So when we get back to brain studies and what's happening, we start to recognize that this is actually not apples to apples. And so how we perceive time will be based on our individual way in which we measure time. Now, there are some people who will orient their day between meals. They actually will measure time between meals, between when have I eaten last. And this is something that has also been studied. Now, I cannot give you the quote of whom and how and all of this. That's your department, Kirsten.
Oh, dear.
I'm just going to tell you the story.
Okay, you tell me the story.
Yeah. So the story is that there has been these studies where there are certain people who will measure time between meals. So for those people who were hungry and seeing the dessert, it probably felt to them like, wait, I didn't get to look at that long enough.
Right.
Versus the person who was full and was like, because it could have been positive but low motivation to that person. Whereas the flower may have been more positive but high motivation because they just can't wait to get back outside, perhaps, right? So it becomes individual. And it becomes individual from your perspective, how you actually filter your life. So there are people who measure time between meals. There are people who measure time between activity. How active am I being? When's the last time I got up and moved around? There are people who measure time between sleep. When's the last time I got to take a nap? There are people who measure time between sex because it's a biological thing. So there's this way in which we start to relate to time based on our particular filtering mechanism.
Totally makes
right?
sense.
So their viewpoint will shift. Now, it also can come down to, am I full? So dessert's not that enticing.
Sure.
Versus the person who's sitting there watching these slides and who's hungry. Now, same person could be full and not have reacted to that slide in the same way that they did when they were hungry. So there's so many variables in here that we get to look at, this is what makes our topic of time so fascinating, that we can study it. We can get a broad brushstroke of understanding and saying, high level, we humans have a tendency toward X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
But when we really start to look at the individual way in which we filter and process and relate to things, there are many, many variables. And so the study with the people looking at the awe-inspiring events is different than looking at survival aspects.
Sure.
Food is survival.
It is survival.
Sitting in the
it's
woods
physiological,
is not,
right? Like you need it.
You need it.
And if you're hungry, you need it more.
You need it more, right? Like we all know not to grocery shop when we're hungry.
Oh my gosh,
right?
Don't go to Costco.
Don't go. Yeah.
Oh dear goodness.
Right.
Yeah.
And talk about a time warp, right?
Yeah, you're like,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So there is a survival mechanism in there.
Yes.
But back to flow.
Yeah, let's talk about flow a little bit. Yeah.
So the awe-inspiring and the flow, and it feels like time spreads and it lasts much longer. There's also something really interesting, because if we're in flow and we're in those awe-inspiring places, it does feel like we step into a place of timelessness. And we all know that. We've all made the conversation or the remark of, it feels like time is standing still.
Yes.
Right? We have these phrases in our life
Absolutely.
to talk about these kinds of events. And also, it can feel like when we're at a wedding reception, like all of a sudden, like, where is the time gone? We're having so much fun. Where is it gone? How is it not going on and on and on? Oh my gosh, it's been 7 hours we've been here, though, really, if we are to look at our watches. So there's different ways that being in the flow can even affect our perception of, does it feel like time has expanded and we're in timelessness, or has it felt like time has compressed and it's just gone by in the blink of an eye? Both are positive.
Right.
So
how interesting. Because we're talking about, this isn't fear. We're not talking about fear yet.
Yeah.
These are good, positive things. And you're right. I have looked at my watch. I mean, I remember my daughter and I were at one of those paint your own clay, and we're sitting there and we're chatting, and I hadn't gotten a chance to really talk to her in a long time. And she's my youngest, and we're painting and painting. And finally, she looked at me at one point and she goes, God, I'm hungry. And I'm thinking to myself, how could you be hungry? We just had lunch, because this was an afternoon activity. We just had lunch. And I looked at my watch, and we had been there almost 4 hours. And it was 5:30. I mean, I said to this guy, "What? Oh my gosh, are you?" He goes, "Oh, I had stuff to do, so I just stayed open." And I'm like, well, thank you. So we finished our projects and got some dinner, but it could have been 10 minutes in my head. And so can we talk about how to use the tools of both of these things? Can we possibly engage our, I want this to last forever feeling? And how do we do this?
Yeah. So there's a perspective shift in here, and I'm going to back into answering that question. And I want to start with talking about a shamanic perspective on time. And again, what does it mean to talk about a shamanic perspective? It means that from the point of view of looking at something, from a shamanic perspective, we realize that past, present, and future is all happening simultaneously, and that the shaman is the one who knows how to navigate the spiritual realms on behalf of themselves or another, and recognizes that we actually operate in timelessness. Okay, so I'm throwing a big concept out here. But it suggests that, and not just suggests, this really is the world that we learn to operate in as we move through the studies of the shamanic path, is that we can shift our perspective to organize ourselves. And time, linear time, is actually a tool.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an illusion that that's the only way that things work.
So the tool of my watch that's telling me what 60 minutes is and all that, that is what you're saying is that's an illusion. The fact that it's like 60 seconds is 60 seconds, but that doesn't mean that 60 seconds has to take 60 seconds?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
We're
yeah.
Okay. So, but I'm not going to go
into the woo-woo part of
this. Yeah, this is the woo part of the show. All right, but I'm going to try to make it practical. So, linear time is a tool that the past, the present, and the future are all operating simultaneously. But we operate in our everyday reality through linear time, and it's a great tool. It's what helps us to get to where we need to go on time, right? I know that it takes me 30 minutes to get to your house from my house. So I have to leave my house at a certain time to get here, to do our show, right?
Right.
That's a great tool.
Okay, yeah.
Otherwise,
you just randomly show up.
Show up, yeah. Like, and you're like, sorry, I'm not even here. So to recognize that we begin to orient in a certain way, we've conditioned ourselves in a certain way to look at it. Now, when you say, how can we look at things, and using the example of, I want this to last forever, I'm having such a good time, and wow, who knew what time it was we were having such a good time? Those are two different perspectives. Now, using the example of we're having a wonderful time and we start to think, I don't ever want this to end. I want this to last forever. Remember back to flow, I said, what happens in that is that we pull our circuits of energy out of the past and out of the future. Okay. Now think about our circuits of energy as resources, right? If we want to have 100% of our resources available to us, and we start to put 20% into the past and 30% into the future, that's 50% going into either direction. Now we're operating at 50% right here, right now, in the present. Okay. So when we pull our circuits of energy out of the past and out of the future, we're fully available. We're 100% in the present moment, or in flow. Okay.
Okay.
Now, when we're at an event where we start to say, I don't want this to ever end, what is actually happening as we switch into that perspective, that mode of thinking, if you will, we have just taken our 100% circuits of energy and we've taken a percentage and we've put it into the future, and we're fearing the ending. Or I don't know if fearing is the right word, but we're starting. We're starting to posture for the end of something.
Right.
Sure.
So that's future.
That's future. We're not in the present. Now, you and your daughter at Color Me Mine, you were neither in the past nor in the future.
Right.
You were simply where you were.
Talking.
So you weren't in either direction. So it felt like it was timeless.
It was
like,
timeless.
Where did the time go? I can't even believe it, because you weren't in the past and you weren't in the future. Until your daughter's biological clock kicks in and she goes, wow, I'm hungry. It has been a long time since my last feeding. Right? And if you don't orient that way, Kirsten, you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I only need one snack a day. Yes. So I don't orient that way. Right?
Okay.
So at that point, her biological clock kicked in, and it made everybody start to come back to the tool of, well, just how long have we been here?
Right. The tool on my wrist.
Right, yeah. Again, it's so fascinating, because in the work that I teach and I practice and I study in the shamanic path, we talk so much about our current reality is made up of our perspective, our perception, or our holding of that event. So time, back to how time affects us, it has so much to do with emotions, as you were talking about in the study, but it also has to do with our perception of how we're engaging it. Did you ever notice, I just went on a hike up in the Uintas with my man the other day, and it was a 2.5 hour hike to the lake that we went to. And it felt about that. We hiked, we got to our destination, and he looked at me and he said, "How long do you think that was?" And I kind of gauged. Now my gauge is that in my client work, I work in 90-minute blocks. I know what that feels like.
Okay.
It's actually an imprint.
Yeah.
I have
an
imprint.
Often.
I do it so often that I can gauge 90 minutes just based on feel. Right? And I go, I think that it took us about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. We looked at the clock. It was pretty right on. Then we're hiking back. Now, there's also this interesting thing that on your way out to a place, a destination you haven't been, it can feel like it takes a lot longer, right?
What is that?
Because we haven't been there before.
Right.
Right. And then on the way back, at one point, he said, "Wow, it just feels like we're just going so fast. Like we must have done that in 45 minutes. And I said, "I don't know. Let's look." And it took 2.5 hours, right? And so there's this really weird perception of time. And on the way back, first of all, it's kind of like horse returning to food source, right? You're just like, dun, 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 and you've walked that path. There's an energetic familiarity. And so you kind of cruise. Yeah. On the way out, everything is like that awe-inspiring place. Like, whoa, look at that. And isn't that amazing? And look at that lake. And I never noticed that mountain peak. And so it feels like time is stretched. But it took us the same amount of time up as it took us back. From a linear time perspective.
I have something about this. Yeah. So this is fascinating. The changes in perception of time with aging is kind of what you just hit on, because what they surmise is that if you look at a day in a life of a 11-year-old, that is 1/4000th of their time on Earth. But a day in a life of a 55-year-old is 1/20,000th of their days on Earth, right? So you've got that just predominant amount of time to just be having that day, right? One's much longer than the other. But then you've got the fact that they're saying that the days of a youth, of a young person, are very new to them. Right. And they're repetitive for adults. And so basically what they're saying is the children and this is your walk to the lake. Right. The children have to be extremely engaged. They have to dedicate like lots of their neural resources and brain power because they're trying to figure out how to act correctly with what's going on right then in their lives, right? You've never been on that path. You're trying to pay attention. Is there a drop off on the left, whatever? Where adults, however, so much of our day is just another time I've seen the same thing again. And so we don't have to use our mental processes. And they're basically suggesting that the brain, when they're recording fewer densely rich memories, you don't remember it as well. Let me read this word for word. The brain will record fewer densely rich memories during frequent periods of disengagement from present moment. But anyway, it's basically saying that your walk to the lake is more like a child. Your walk back from the lake is more like an adult.
Correct. Right.
That's what I'm trying to say.
There you go. Nice and concise.
Yeah. Well, finally. At that, I think let's take a break and we'll come back with a little more discussion about time. And then we'll also be talking about a wine to pair with this episode. So stay tuned, you guys. Thanks for tuning in and listening to us talk through all this craziness about time.
Stay tuned to hear what type of wine Kirsten will pair with this story right after this.
Today's podcast is brought to you by my company, Uplift Gift, when words aren't enough. When I had cancer, friends sent me the most amazing, wonderful gifts and cards, and they were from their hearts, and they made me feel so comforted and loved. And at the time, I was writing a column for the Huffington Post on wine pairings called Wines to Pair with Life, and so I wrote a series of articles about wines to pair with breast cancer. So in the public, purview, people started contacting me saying, what should I send my friends? What were the best gifts when someone gets bad news? And finally, I just heard, this message that said, this is what you need to do, Kirsten. This is your gift out of your cancer that you can give the rest of the world. So the company, again, is Uplift Gift. And we help you support your friends and loved ones who may be far away from you, who just are getting a divorce or are dealing with a parent dying or are struggling with a new diagnosis. I realized people need help talking to others who've been given bad news. Since I've been through that experience quite a few times in my life, I feel like the Uplift Gift series of gift boxes are a perfect fit to help you support your friends. Uplift Gift, when words aren't enough.
Next up, Kirsten's choice for a wine to open after the show.
Welcome back, you guys. Okay, so back to the subject of time here. I've read so many books about flow and trying to narrow your focus so that you can get into flow. So can you tell me the shamanic way that you would approach actual getting yourself as likely as possible in a flow situation?
Yes. How much time do we have?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So the quickest, I guess, most concise practice in this moment, as you ask me this question, is really to come back to pulling your circuits of energy out of the past and out of the future to the present. And what that requires is the ability to recognize that you are doing that, right?
Okay. Yes.
Because we have to be able to identify, like, oh God, I'm not here, I'm somewhere else.
It becomes less accidental, but then you're trying to get in the
much
flow.
more intentional.
Okay.
That we can actually recognize that we can consciously come into presence. Now, the example of the athletes, Elizabeth Gilbert gave a great talk years and years and years ago on TED Talks, and it was around the creative process and creation. And she talked a lot about artists in the flow, in the moment, where it's a God moment is another way that we can talk about it, right?
She also wrote about that in her book, Big Magic.
She did, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we can actually consciously create that for ourselves. Now, in the example of the athletes and the artists and the dancers and that kind of example, it's something that they will often talk about. It just happens. And I think you and I, Kirsten, can also reflect on moments where it's like, oh yeah, I just dropped into the flow. Like we understand that, right? And it does feel like it just happens, that there is no explanation for it.
You can't go, I'm going to go out and have a ski day and it's just, I'm going to be in the flow today.
Right. Yeah, but you can.
Okay. So okay.
So you can.
Talk to me.
Yeah. Now, it has a different quality than when that drop-in really does happen, when that God moment really does happen. But we're talking about, is there a practice? Is there a way that I can cultivate more of this? And yes, you can. You can consciously take inventory of, where am I? How much of my life force energy is in the past and how much of my life force energy is in the future? And in that recognition, in that inventory, we actually have the capability to pull our circuits of energy back to the present moment. Now, I use a visualization for myself and with my clients when we're working with this, where I say, I want you to think about your circuits of energy as all these points of light. And however you imagine your points of light, how many points of light do you have right now in the past? Pull them forward. See it in your mind's eye. Pull all those points of light right here, right now. How many points of light do you have in the future? See it in your mind's eye. Just imagine it. Now I want you to pull all those points of light back from the future to the present moment. Pull all your circuits of energy and have them be right here. And I want you to anchor it into this present moment, ground it into the earth. Think about how you're planting all your circuits of light into the earth where you are right here, right now, and drop into this present moment and be here. Now, the practice of getting efficient at that would be making the lived experience of doing that. And that's where it would come back to having a mindful practice, a meditation practice, something where you experience what it feels like to consciously pull your circuits of energy back to the present moment, anchor it, plant it, if you will, into the earth right here and right now, and to make the lived experience of what it feels like to have all your circuits of energy home in the present moment. So I would suggest to our listeners, have a practice where you actually do that so you know what it feels like. You want to know what it feels like so that when you're out having your ski day and you want to consciously, intentionally create flow in your ski day, you can say to yourself, I know how to do this. I can pull all my circuits of energy out of the past and out of the future, and I can land right here, and I have nothing else happening in my life except this moment right here and right now. And that will actually begin to intentionally create that place of flow that seemingly spontaneously happens for the athlete, the artist, etc., etc., etc. Because what's happening in that moment is that they are nowhere else except where they are. And they are actually in response to that place of timelessness.
That's amazing. That is so amazing. And it also makes sense because as a non-shaman person in the world, I know people are like, my meditative practice has taken me to places I never thought I'd get. And every time I sit down and meditate, and I'm like, I don't understand how me sitting here trying to keep my mind empty and allow these thoughts to go away and all this, I just don't understand how, but what you're explaining to me is the better you can get at that process of not thinking about the future, not thinking about the past, just being right in the moment right now, bringing those lights back into me and then grounding right here, that better you get at that, the more you can use that as a tool in your life, which then allows you to appreciate a ski day more than I would, or I'm not saying I wouldn't have appreciated it otherwise, but, you know, you get an extra level or an extra enjoyment by doing that on, say, a ski day.
Right. You know how, so you and I have mountain biked together.
Yeah.
And you know that place, I think our last ride, I remember we were doing that climb up, and it's like an 8-minute climb or whatever it is.
It's called Porcupine. Yes. Porcupine. I know it well.
Right. But I think it was even Rambler.
Oh, was it Rambler
I think
before?
So,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
And we got to the top, and one of us, I can't remember which one of us, made the comment of, like, you know, when you're in that physical activity where it's requiring all your circuits of energy
Yes.
to not bite it on your bike, you're not thinking about anything else.
No, you're not.
Right? So in that example, what's happening is our activity is requiring that we better not be anywhere else, or imminent danger is right around the corner, right? And so we naturally do that. We pull in our resources, i.e. our life force energy circuits, and we pull them all into that present moment.
Right.
And we're not thinking about anything else. It's why it's so cathartic.
Which is what they say about yoga, because you're focusing on holding the posture, which doesn't work for me, except for now and then. But yes, mountain biking, you know, got to do it or die. Yeah, I'm paying attention. Oh boy. Awesome. Okay, we're going to take one more break and then we're going to come back with the idea of what wine would pair with this amazing discussion on flow and emotions and how they affect our time. So stay tuned, you guys. We're going to be right back with a wine that is one of our favorites, everybody's favorite. I promise you it's one of your favorites. Stay tuned.
Thanks for staying tuned to Wines and Wonders. Now back to Kirsten.
Welcome back, you guys. We're on to we've been talking a lot about wonders and time and that today. And so we've been really focused on the wonders part of the title, but we do have wines in the subject title. So we better get a wine in here at some point. And so what I wanted to talk about today, your fave, my fave, sparkling wine. I mean, who does not like a glass of bubbles handed to you at any time? We can talk about bubbles at Christmas. We can talk about bubbles at New Year's. We can talk about bubbles for 4th of July. I mean, like, there's no non-appropriate time to pull bubbles out to serve them. And I wanted to talk about the fact that basically when you get a glass of sparkling wine that's, let's say it's over $10 a bottle, maybe $15 a bottle, most of those wines have been created in a way that there are two ways that they've been created, and they take extra time to create either of these two ways, and I'll explain. So I wanted to talk today about how you create sparkling wine, because it's very interesting, and it's really a lot longer process than just creating a regular still wine, about double at least the process. So you basically make a still wine. So think about any of your still wines, a wine that doesn't have any bubbles in it. It's a Merlot, or it's a Chardonnay, or it's a Albarino, or a Chianti. Right. Yes, there we go. Okay, so you make the wine, and you make it so that it is highly, highly acidic. You don't allow any sugar to be left in the wine at all. No residual sugar. And it may surprise you to know that some of our wines that are some of our favorite wines actually have a little sugar left in them, because it's a little bit like, I use the lemonade example. If you have a lemonade example and you were trying to drink pure lemon with water in it, it would be very, very sour in your mouth. But just a titch of sweetness allows it to be a very refreshing drink in the summer, just a titch. And that's kind of what happens with some wines, where you want to leave a little bit of residual sugar in there to give it just a balance to the highly acidic grapes that are making the wine. But in this case, you do not leave any sugar in there. It's a highly acidic, like you would taste it and think, ugh, who would ever want something like this? And it's still. Then you take that still wine, and now is where the two paths dissect or diverge. You've got one that, let's just talk about Prosecco. So Prosecco, we all are familiar with. I hope you're familiar with Prosecco. If you're not, please go buy a bottle and get yourself familiar. It's a very refreshing end product. It's got the bubbles in it, but it doesn't have as many bubbles in it as a champagne or a sparkling wine from, say, California does. And the way they make Prosecco is they will take that still wine and they pour it into a big, huge vat. And this is called the Charmat method, also the tank method. And tank is the most descriptive for us. And you pour all that wine into a tank, and basically you take sugar and yeast, throw it into the tank, and the sugar eat the yeast, and it causes bubbles. But it's bubbles in a big, huge tank, right? And this tank has got a lid on it so the bubbles stay in it. But it's a big, huge tank. And then what you do is you take the tank, and there's a little spigot in the tank, and you just pour the new bubbly wine into bottles. Okay, and those are your bottles of Prosecco, okay? And the way you get sweetness in that is you actually would add a little bit of the dosage into the wine that would determine, you can add that right at the end, where you might add a tablespoon of wine plus a little bit of sugar into it, sweetness into it. That is how you determine the level of sweetness in, say, a Brut Prosecco or an extra dry Prosecco, that same thing. So anyway, that's how you make Prosecco. Big tank, kind of like we would envision Coke, right? Except minus the wine part at the beginning. But then there's another method, and it is called the champagne method or the traditional method. And this is the most used in finer wines. And I'm not saying Prosecco is not fine, but it's just the way Prosecco was made. And that's the way it was. But traditional or champagne is you make that wine, same way, but then when you're ready to, you've got the still wine, you take that still wine, you put it into a specific bottle. And then in that bottle, you add the yeast and the sugar into the bottle, because that is what is going to, the yeast eat the sugar, create the carbon dioxide and the alcohol, and it's going to add the bubbles to it, right? So you add that to the bottle, and then you put like a beer cap on the top, and you let it sit there, and those yeast eat the sugar. And then you can age it for a long time on those dead yeast cells, or you can let it go soon. So it's up to the vintner. But eventually, you get that bottle so that that dead yeast cell sludge is at the neck of the bottle. That's called riddling. And they used to do it by hand, but they slowly turn the bottle up in a rack so that it's eventually straight up and down. The neck is down, and then they take that bottle and they freeze the neck of the bottle in a brine solution in a very, very cold water so that the neck of the bottle, the sludge kind of freezes. Then they flip the bottle back up and they pop that beer cap off the top, and that sludge comes shooting out because of the pressure, shooting out of the top. And so you've got the yeast removed and the dead yeast cells. And then you put in the dosage, which is, again, figuring out how sweet you want the ultimate wine, because you're putting in wine and sugar back into the bottle. And then you put the actual cork onto the bottle and sell it. So those are the two ways that you mostly see in making sparkling wines. And it takes basically a long time compared to a still wine, which you had way long ago. So I'm going to choose a specific sparkling wine after this.
How much time does it take to make the Prosecco in the tank method versus the champagne in the bottle method?
Good question. Great question. Star for you.
Thank you.
Hence the difference in price between Prosecco and champagne for sure, and many sparkling wines that are come out of California or so. Prosecco is a much faster, it will happen in a couple months where that's absolutely ready to go. Champagne can take 2 years in the bottle sitting there.
Wow.
So it is the speed with which it happens is a degree of the price with which you pay for each bottle. Okay. So yeah. Good job.
Thanks.
Love that. Okay, we'll be right back, and I'm going to choose a sparkling wine to go with this story.
Next up, Kirsten's choice for a wine to open after the show.
All right, you guys. And Danielle, thank you so much for being here today, because this is just so much fun to talk about this stuff. Every time you're here, I get new perspectives on things. And I asked for forgiveness on trying to talk about these studies. I don't really know how to make studies audio friendly yet. So we're gonna all go through this with me, because I'm the facts person on the study, that kind of stuff. So I'll learn a better way.
Right.
All right.
In time.
Yes. In time. Plenty of time. So I am going to choose today to pair our discussion of the flow and the amount of time it takes to create champagne and sparkling wine. I'm going to pair it with the Domaine Carneros 2015 Brut from Carneros, California. And this is a blend of grapes grown on their estate there at Domaine Carneros. Perhaps you've seen Domaine Carneros if you've ever been to Napa or Sonoma. It is a stunning architecture, a big, huge yellow building that looks like it should be in the middle of Italy somewhere. It is absolutely stunning, and they have a restaurant there that you can go to. It's not just a tasting bar. It's really fun. Anyway, Domaine Carneros, and this wine is aged a minimum of 3 years in their cellar. It is 50% Pinot Noir, 50% Chardonnay, which is what they grow there at Domaine Carneros. And literally with this wine, it's not expensive. This is about an $18 bottle of wine. It's not crazy expensive. And you get flowers and lime lime zest and like pear and apple in this. The bubbles are very persistent and they're very, there's some bottles that you pour and like within 5 minutes you can't even see bubbles anymore.
Mhm.
The bubbles in this are very persistent and they're very fine and they're beautiful. And they know what they're doing at Domaine Carneros with their sparkling wine. And basically, it is a very affordable and friendly wine to have any time of the year. That's my go-to. Have it in the house, always available, so that if somebody comes over or is going to come over, I can throw it in the refrigerator and have it ready for when they're coming over. I can grab it and go to a celebration somewhere. Super easy. So again, Domaine Carneros, I happen to have the 2015 Brut. I'm out of Carneros, California, and it's about, $20 or so. All right. Well,
I have a question.
Yeah. Oh, please. I love questions.
Good. All right. So it's 50% Pinot Noir,
Yes.
50% Chardonnay.
Yes.
So is it like a rosé? Is it like this
Oh.
blend?
Oh gosh, another sticker for you. Dang, you're keeping me at a level I should be talking. I forget everybody doesn't know this stuff. Wow. So thank you for asking. Pinot Noir is a red grape,
Yeah.
right? Well, the only reason it's red is because they allow the juice, when you squeeze a Pinot Noir grape, you allow the juice to sit on the red skin. And the red skins of the grape are like little dye packets,
Mhm.
and they dye the juice red.
Mhm.
If you pull that juice away from the skins
Mhm.
very quickly,
Mhm.
it is a slightly less white wine.
Mm.
It's got a slight tinge to it,
Mhm.
but it is nothing that you would call it a real rosé or
Mhm.
have even perceptible pink
Okay.
to it. And so they use the Pinot Noir juice without the dye, basically,
Okay.
in it. And then the Chardonnay obviously is a white grape.
Mhm.
So then you get this beautiful, no color in it, or
Mhm.
it will probably be a beautiful yellow with slight tinge of orange maybe in it, just
Mhm.
a little bit.
Mhm.
And Blanc, when you look at wine bottles, Blanc de Noir,
Mhm.
de Noir,
Yeah.
Blanc de
Oh,
Noir
yeah. Okay.
is from,
white noir, right?
it's from
the
the black, it's white from black.
yeah.
And so those, though, because they're all black grapes, because it's white from black, they only can use black grapes in that.
Mhm.
So that's Pinot Noir or Pinot Meunier or whatever they're making it from. Those grapes will, because of the fact that there's a lot of juice that's been sitting on skins, even for moments, that will actually have typically a perceptible orangey or pinkish
Mhm.
hue to it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yes.
All right. And Brut means that there's been sugar added back into it?
Yes, it does.
Okay. I
Brut
never
is the
knew.
most popular
Yeah.
style of sparkling wine
Mhm.
here in the U.S. And Brut means that it's not completely dry because most people, it's a long one. Sorry, guys, but here, if you got a can of Coke and it's flat,
Yeah.
it tastes overly sickly sweet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If it's bubbly, the bubbles add a perception of acid
Mm.
to that drink. And the same thing happens with wine. So if you took the Brut sparkling wine and you let it go flat, you would actually taste the perceptible sweetness.
Okay.
But the bubbles in the wine add a perception of acid.
Mhm.
And so you end up with a balanced mouth feel and mouth taste versus what would be if you left it dry and didn't add any little sugar back
Mhm.
into it. If you left it dry, it would be overly acidic,
Right.
often in your mouth. So there you go. Thank
right.
you, Danielle.
Yeah.
Good questions.
Thanks.
All right, guys, we are so happy to get to talk with you about this subject of time. So stay tuned. We'll have more segments coming up, and we really appreciate you guys listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Wines and Wonders with Kirsten Fox. True stories with a side of wine.